Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students of Honors Part 3, how are you doing? Today, I am going to discuss a very important item of pragmatics, and that is how a spoken language is different from written language. And this very question has been set several times in the National University question. And let us now know the introduction. Spoken language and written language are the primary and secondary forms of the same language. The same linguistic system is the basis for both spoken and written language, but they exploit different features of the system and have different properties. A spoken language is quick, direct and interactive and allows for immediate feedback, whereas written language is visible, written and hence well organized and more permanent. Speaking happens intuitively without being taught. Learning to speak is a natural development process. Whereas learning to write needs to be explicitly taught and consciously practiced over certain period of time. All human communities use spoken or signed language, but not all the human communities use writing language. A written language has greater social prestige in those societies where it is used, and it has greater official recognition in most cases where you need to communicate something important. In an official institution or in a company, such as filing a tax return or applying for a job, you are expected to do so in writing, not just talk to some people. Written language also has greater legal force. Written contracts have achieved greater validity than a spoken agreement. Written language technically forms the standard for prestigious forms of the spoken language, so that speaking correctly is taken to mean speaking in a way that is similar to how you write. And both spoken and written language have some advantages and disadvantages. Written language has the advantage of being permanent and visible. Speech can only be perceived through hearing, and it is gone as soon as it is produced. Writing allows communication over long distances, which was not possible for speech until radio and telephone were not invented. When we produce writing, we can plan what we are going to say and we revise it as we go on. The same is not possible in speech. In a spoken language, what is said cannot be altered. Being able to write things down mean we can keep hold of information without having to keep it in our memory. It also makes it easy to preserve information beyond the life of a single individual and to create enduring works of literature. On the contrary, a spoken language is quicker to produce than a written language. A spoken language is direct and interactive, and a spoken language allows immediate feedback. This means it is easy for communicative partners to ask questions or ask for clarification. It is easy to make sure that what you said has been properly understood. Speaking also allows us to use extra clues such as intonation and body language to bring our message across. My dear students, speaking is a social activity which takes place between people in a social setting and assists integrate people into social groups. Speaking is an everyday activity that everyone takes part in, as a poster writing which depends on access to education, and so in many societies poster writing is possible only on the part of a very small elite. On the other hand, when we speak, we lack many of the means of clearly structuring a message which is available when we write. We can't use paragraphs, structure, or punctuation, capitalization, and other visual devices which help clarify our message when we write. The visible and permanent properties of writing also means that it is easier to use more complex sentence structure and text structure when we write, because the reader can go back and reread a piece of text if the structure was not clear in the first time around. And let me now sum up my discussion by saying some typical traits of speech versus writing. And the very first thing is typical speech feature. The first typical speech feature is that speaking is less explicit and writing is more explicit. Speaking language is less clear. In speaking language, we use less clear sentence boundaries, but in writing language, we use clear sentence boundaries, which is indicated by punctuation marks. Speaking language is simpler and looser structure based, whereas in written language the structure is complex and integrated. And speaking language use repetitive and restricted vocabulary, whereas written language use less repetitive, less restricted vocabulary. In speaking, it is normal to have certain degree of disfluency, meaning that we make errors as we speak and have to correct ourselves. On the other hand, written language typically shows fluency at least in final form after being through a number of drafts. In a speech, we have monitoring features, but in written language there is no monitoring features. And the speaking language has some interaction features, but the written language has few interaction features. And the speaking language has more informal features, but the written language has more formal features. In a speech, the context is diluted and conveyed through many more words. There are a lot of repetitions, glosses, fillers in the spoken language, whereas in written language the context is presented much more densely. In a spoken language, speakers sometimes use a regional or other limited context dialect, whereas in written language we see acceptable standard variety of the language is used. My dear students, I hope that you have listened what I have said so far and has also realized the things that I have said, and with these few words I would like to conclude my lecture for today, and thank you my dear students for listening to my lecture, and wish you very best. Thank you very much.